Hi, everybody. Welcome. Hola, bienvenidos. Vamos a empezar en unos minutos. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. You are joining Sabotaging Sanctuary. Están juntándose a un webinario sobre interpretación. Disculpen, sobre el santuario. Ya me ando leyendo y viendo cosas al mismo tiempo y me ando cuatrapeando. So I'm reading and getting all mixed up all by myself. But welcome everyone. If folks can just go ahead and as we're waiting for people to join the webinar, put in the chat your name, where you're calling in from, where you're joining this webinar from, and if you're part of any organization, that would be really wonderful to start to get to know each other. Entonces, mientras están metiendo al webinario, si pueden poner en el chat su nombre, sus pronombres y de dónde vienen, ¿verdad? De qué ciudad nos están, se están sintonizando y si son parte de alguna organización, pues así nos podemos empezar a conocer. Vamos a empezar en unos breves minutos, pero estamos muy emocionados de tenerlos aquí con nosotros. We're going to start in a couple of moments, but we're really excited to have everyone here joining us. So de nuevo, para la gente que viene llegando, si pueden poner en el chat su nombre, su organización, su ciudad, sus pronombres, así nos podemos ir conociendo. If folks can put in the chat your name, your pronouns, where you're calling from, we can start to get to know each other. And I want to check in to make sure, did we figure out the interpretation? Getting the interpreter assigned? Let me know whenever that is figured out. Wow, look at all these people, both from Colorado and from around the country. Super exciting. Es muy emocionante ver que hay gente no solamente de Colorado, ¿verdad? Pero también de diferentes partes del país. Todos son muy, muy bienvenidos. Everyone is really welcome. We're super excited to have this conversation, to be talking about data brokers, to be talking about how we can strengthen sanctuary cities. Estamos muy emocionados de tener esta conversación para hablar de los comerciantes de datos y cómo podemos fortalecer la ciudad de santuario. Entonces veo que tenemos a nuestra querida intérprete en el chat. Estamos tratando de ver cómo la podemos autorizar para que pueda hacer interpretación. Así que vamos a esperar unos momentos para que eso pase. So I can see that we're still trying to figure out how to activate the interpretation. So just give us a couple of seconds while we figure that out. But yeah, keep the introductions coming, y'all. It's really great to see such an amazing group of people here. So let me know. Cool. Okay. We are also figuring out live streaming this on Facebook. So also just shout out that whenever we are able to do that folks can also help share that out because that will be another great way for folks to learn about what's happening. También parte de la razón que estamos esperando unos momentitos es porque vamos a compartir este video en Facebook, ¿verdad? Particularmente en Colorado. Entonces también para que la gente lo pueda compartir con todos sus contactos porque va a ser otra muy buena manera para que las personas sepan todo lo que está pasando, ¿verdad? Y puedan enterarse de toda la información que queremos compartir con ellas el día de hoy. Para las personas que no me conocen, mi nombre es Jacinta González. Yo soy una organizadora nacional con Mi Gente. Y Mi Gente es una organización política, un hogar político de gente latina, latiné, latinex, que se está organizando para luchar por sus derechos. Entonces, estamos muy, muy emocionadas de estar aquí con ustedes. So to just introduce myself, my name is Jacinta González. I am a national organizer with Mi Gente. And Mi Gente is a political home, a political hub for organizing in the Latine, Chicane, Latina community around all of our human rights. And so we're really excited to be here with all of y'all today. Did we figure out the Facebook? Yes? No?
Sí, en una manera, but we are going to assign interpretation now.
Okay, cool. Good. We got one down, one to go. So ya tenemos el Facebook compártanlo, dígale a todo el mundo que lo siga, por la gente que no está registrada aquí en el webinario, lo pueda ver por allá. So if folks want to share out the stuff that's on Facebook, that's a great way for folks to start to plug in if they're not able to join the webinar right now. And then we're just going to wait a couple of seconds for interpretation. Indira, are you good? ¿Estamos?
Hola, sí.
Excelente. Dale, pues, gracias.
I could do our language justice statement. Buenas tardes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Indira Guzman, and I'm here with the Community Language Co-op. Mi nombre es Indira Guzmán y estoy aquí con la Community Language Co-op. Y esta tarde los organizadores de este evento han hecho un compromiso a la justicia del lenguaje. We've made a commitment to language justice. So today we are going to create a space where everyone can participate and engage in the language of their hearts. We are going to have English and Spanish interpretation available. So in a second, when we turn on interpretation, you will see an icon on the bottom of the screen that says interpretation. Please click on that icon and select the language that you prefer to engage in. If you are on a cell phone or a tablet, look for the more options or the 3 dots, and you'll be able to select the language that you prefer to engage in. Entonces, para crear el espacio de la justicia del lenguaje, voy a pedir que cuando prendamos la interpretación, usted va a ver un globo terráqueo que dice interpretación en la parte de abajo de la pantalla. Seleccione ese globo y seleccione el idioma en el que prefiere participar. También si trae su celular o su tablet, busque la opción de más o los 3 puntitos y ahí encontrará la opción de interpretación. Entonces, vamos a aprender la interpretación y voy a pedir que todos seleccionen su idioma en este momento. Muchas gracias. Let's go ahead and turn on interpretation.
Thank you so much for that, Indira, and thank you so much for offering interpretation. It is very, 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 we're very thankful for the work that you're doing in this moment. If there's any issues with interpretation, please don't feel free to put it in the chat so that we can make sure that we address any issues. So nada más estamos dando las gracias a la intérprete diciendo que si hay cualquier problema con interpretación en algún momento, no lo pueden acceder, no se escucha, pónganlo en el chat y ahí también podemos irnos comunicando para arreglar las cosas y ver cómo se puede mover para hacia adelante. Entonces, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to switch over to English. And again, just say thank you all so much for being here with us. We're really excited to be able to have this conversation. We're really excited for the report that just came out last week in Colorado, Sabotaging Sanctuary. You are today going to get to hear both a lot of the ins and outs of the findings. So if you are a nerd and you want to know, wait, what data, how's that all happening? We got you. We're going to break it down. If you're an organizer and you're like, what are they doing about it though? We got you. We're going to talk about that too. So, and then we'll also have space to have questions and answers. So if there's anything that you want to know more about, if there's ways that you want to know about how you can plug in or how you can do some of this work in your city, let us know and we can also have that conversation. So that's the general kind of flow around all of this today. And to give people a little bit of background, I mentioned I'm an organizer with Mi Gente, and I've also been working on our No Tech for ICE campaign since about 2018. And you know, similar to probably what you'll hear from a lot of folks in Colorado, we started this campaign because we just started to notice that ICE agents were acting funny, right? The way that they were actually operating in our communities, the way that we were conducting raids, the way that they were going into people's homes and workplaces was just shifting. And they had information that we were like, they're not that smart. How do they know that, right? They had information about not only people's addresses, but what cars they were driving, who they had relationships with. And so we knew that we needed to do more digging. And in all of this research that we were doing, over and over again came up this concept of data brokers. We're like, who's a data broker and why does it matter? Turns out data, information on us is really, really valuable. I always love to tell people it's more valuable than oil. It's more valuable than gold. All these tech companies are making billions of dollars off of it. And it turns out that it's not just a really lucrative industry for people who want to sell us the right color shoes or the right blender that we're looking for. It's also something that the police, including immigration agents, are really interested in. And it's because turns out they don't need a warrant for it. They just get to buy it. And then they get to have all of this information. And so as the research has progressed, we've really realized, one, that the data industry is dominated by two main companies, Thomson Reuters and LexisNexis. So we're going to talk a lot about one of those companies today, LexisNexis, because of all of the ways that they're really sabotaging Colorado sanctuary laws. And even though these big companies, we might think that they're unaccountable, we actually started to realize that there's a lot of ways that we can organize against them. So whether you're someone who is in a city, right, and is trying to fight for stronger policies, or whether you're a student, or whether you're an attorney and you want to figure out how to like defend people from this, there's a lot of ways that all of this information can be really, can be made accessible to be able to fight back. So we are 100%, in the words of a lot of amazing comrades that talk about, we don't want paranoia, we want power, right? We're trying to uncover all of this information so that we know how ICE is acting, so that we know what contracts they have, so that from there, we know how to fight back and we know how to organize. And so it's a real honor to be here. Honestly, the students y'all are gonna hear from have been doing some amazing groundbreaking research to kind of unveil information that we had no idea, and I was very shocked. Juicy tidbits about people in the sheriff's office coming your way. But also the organizers really trying to take, a stab at a new frontier in this fight against ICE and this fight for sanctuary for all of our communities. So very, very excited to be here. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Ramona and Maslin to kind of break down what is the information in this report, what have y'all uncovered, what does it mean for us, and then we'll get to start to talk about some good old organizing. So Ramona and Maslin, take it away.
Awesome. Bear with me while I share my screen. I have been having some technical issues, so it may take a minute. Oh, it looks like host has disabled participant screen sharing. Let me try again, sorry. Okay, just want to double check. Is everyone able to see my screen? Perfect, okay. Hello again, and thank you all for being here. This is amazing. Thank you for showing up. My name is Maslin Fryer, and I'm a junior sociology major at Colorado College. I was one of the head student researchers on this report, Sabotaging Sanctuary, How Data Brokers Give ICE Backdoor Access to Colorado's Data and Jails, in collaboration with Ramona Salgado, another Colorado College student, and Erin Lakowski from Empower LLC. Both Ramona and I have grown up in Colorado and lived here our whole lives and are interested in immigration policy work. We partnered with CIRC through the Summer Immigration Institute at Colorado College, which is an excellent program run by Dr. Eric Popkin. So upon our first initial meeting with CIRC, we pretty quickly realized that our most pressing research concern was a recent contract published from ICE in June 2021. That was the first time that ICE has explicitly revealed and stated that they are using data brokers to get around state and municipal sanctuary policies. This is of pressing national concern for everyone, as it can mean that any state or municipal government that is protected by sanctuary policies could be at risk. In particular, this statement said that they are using LexisNexis platform with the APRIS jail release add-on to receive live-time jail booking data. Additionally, we've seen additional research with this come out through Chicago as more research is being done, but this is also a pressing concern in Colorado, which has been listed as a sanctuary state since 2019 under protection of HB 19-1124. HB 19-1124, also known as Protect Colorado Residents from Federal Government Overreach, attempts to minimize contact between local law enforcement officers and federal agents through prohibiting local law enforcement from honoring detainer requests. This is a statewide policy and expects all cities and counties to be compliant under this code, essentially severing the contact between local law enforcement and federal law enforcement to decrease this pipeline between incarceration and deportation. So we were interested to see whether or not this same communication is happening on a Colorado level, and we found evidence that they is. Through core requests and strategic corporate research, we were able to find that the key players in this underground web of communication is LexisNexis, specifically through their contract with APRIS to compile incarceration data under this Accurate Virtual Crime Center. So Accurate Virtual Crime Center compiles data from multiple sources. The primary contributor to this is Colorado Vine, which is marketed as a victim notification information system that provides lifetime jail booking information to individuals through a separate web database. Individuals need to only submit incarcerated individuals' names or other booking information to sign up for lifetime updates on their incarceration status. This may include transportation to different county jails, or booking release, or like release status, posting of bail, any information related to incarceral status. This information has been compiled by APRIS through direct interfaces with counties using the Colorado Vine system, meaning that all of this lifetime information is available to ICE agents as well. ICE agents are then able to receive this lifetime notification to essentially go around sanctuary policies in state by Colorado and use this information to make arrests throughout Colorado, whether this means through awaiting incarcerated individuals outside of county jails, or using information collected to make arrests of individuals as just go about their daily lives. So this is a pressing concern, as it means that they have all this information on live time. Ramona will talk more about this as well.
Thanks, Maslin. So as we were looking more into LexisNexis, we found out that they're effectively trying to privatize law enforcement data sharing. And as Maslin discussed, this has already been apparent nationally through ICE's contract with the company to use their Accurate Virtual Crime Center platform, which gives ICE access to mass amounts of personal data or consumer identities. However, in Colorado specifically, LexisNexis's efforts to collect, package, and sell law enforcement data have been most apparent through their partnership with the Colorado Information Sharing Consortium, or the CISC. So the CISC is a cooperative of 87 Colorado law enforcement agencies, mostly local police and sheriff's offices, who share their data and records with each other. This information can include arrest data, license plate reader data, mugshots, and more. And the CISC centralizes this data in a regional data warehouse that has been hosted by LexisNexis since 2019. So through the CISC, LexisNexis has attempted to gain greater control over law enforcement data in Colorado, notably through their recent pressure on the CISC to integrate their data warehouse with the Accurate Virtual Crime Center, which ICE uses, as we mentioned before. But according to a LexisNexis representative who spoke at the CISC's most recent board meeting this March, the company is actually already in the preliminary stages of migrating the CISC's data onto Accurate, starting with photo lineup features. So if LexisNexis successfully achieves this takeover, likely by January 2024, when their new contracting period with the CISC would begin, if it gets renewed, Colorado police data would essentially become readily available to ICE through Accurate, because agencies have to contribute their own law enforcement data in order to access the mass sources of personal data on this platform. So if we look at the graphic on this next slide, Accurate Virtual Crime Center is essentially at the center of this issue of Colorado data being filtered to ICE. In the bottom left here, we see the data in APRIS and Vine, the add-ons to Accurate that Maslin discussed. So they go through Accurate to ICE. But in terms of the CISC, if we look in the top left corner at Colorado counties, we see that there are currently only 2 law enforcement agencies in Colorado, at least that we know of, El Paso County and Denver PD, that have individual contracts to use Accurate Virtual Crime Center. However, once LexisNexis fully integrates Accurate into the CISC's data warehouse, this would go from just 2 agencies that make their data available to ICE through Accurate to the 80+ agencies that participate in the consortium, essentially joining an information sharing network with ICE. But aside from the Accurate Virtual Crime Center, ICE has been attempting to gain access to the CISC's data warehouse since Colorado's sanctuary bill was passed in 2019. Emails that I obtained from the CISC through public records requests show that ICE began contacting the CISC as soon as 1 month before the passage of Colorado's sanctuary bill, while it was still moving through the General Assembly, to inquire about gaining access to the information in their data warehouse. And ICE agents continued to exchange emails with both the CISC and LexisNexis representatives in the ensuing months after Colorado's sanctuary bill was passed, even going so far as to apply for CISC membership. However, they ultimately never became a member agency, presumably due to the $25,000 cost of membership that they were quoted. But nonetheless, ICE's persistent attempts to gain access to Colorado police data make the integration of Accurate Virtual Crime Center into the CISC's data warehouse all the more alarming. And this is especially true when taking a look at the Denver Sheriff's Office, which is an agency with particularly close ties to LexisNexis through their Chief of Operations, Vincent Line. So Vincent Line, who is also a former CISC board member, is the official who oversees both of Denver's jails, as well as several other police units in the city. And not so coincidentally, he's also one of the 8 representatives on LexisNexis's Public Safety Data Exchange Board, which is the entity responsible for promoting Accurate Virtual Crime Center and advancing the privatization of law enforcement data under LexisNexis nationally. So Line's presence on this board fundamentally contradicts Colorado's sanctuary law, which, as the public safety official in charge of Denver's jails, he should be working to protect rather than undermine. And this is only one of the ways that surveillance and policing technology are becoming more pervasive in Colorado. The CISC also contracts with several other companies that sell predictive policing and surveillance technology so that they can offer discounted products and services to their member agencies. Among these companies are Geolytica, formerly known as Predpol, who rebranded after losing a high-profile contract with the Los Angeles Police Department due to community pushback over a racist feedback loop in their software. EchoSec, a social media monitoring company that uses geolocation to track devices, and BI2, an iris scanning company that has been used to monitor migrants at the US-Mexico border by local sheriffs. These companies, including LexisNexis, which continuously profit off of the criminalization, detention, and deportation of migrants and BIPOC, have no place in our communities, much less in a state with established sanctuary protections like Colorado. Thank you. And Maslin and I will be happy to answer any questions after a search portion. Thanks.
Thank y'all so much, Ramona and Maslin, for all of this research and for breaking down what is in the report. If folks can join me in a virtual round of applause in the chat, sending folks their love. This was a lot of work to uncover, a lot of FOIAs. This is not information that you can Google. This is information that you have to go through a lot of hoops to jump through to get to it. And then actually, like, there's a process that we call, like, it's almost like a process of translation, right? You have to go through the contracts, go through the documents, then make sense of what that actually means for communities, and put it into a way that you can kind of explain in a graphic, explain in a report, explain in a 1 or 2 page summary. So yeah, just want to really celebrate all of the work that y'all have done to get us to this point. So thank y'all so much for this amazing gift to organizing and for showing a model of how we can do this research to help communities on the ground fight back. So yeah, lots of love in the chat. Thank y'all so much for all of that. And I think it's, you know, I told y'all the gossip on the sheriff's office was juicy, right? Vincent Line is playing both sides, both working with communities supposedly, while at the same time working with the same tech companies that are trying to get data into the hands of ICE to be able to go after our community members. So I do just want to sort of say that it's important to understand this information in a context of a longer fight, right? We also know that how we even got to a place where we could have, you know, whether in your part of, you know, whether you call it a sanctuary law or a detainer law or a transfer law or whatever kind of policy you have to protect our community members, these policies came after long histories of fight and struggle against ICE. And so ICE now partnering with tech and data companies like LexisNexis is really their next chapter, right? It's their next move. And so I just say that so that folks also understand that same way sometimes we thought we couldn't get over one type of law or after one sheriff, right? And we've been able to overcome and fight back. That's where we're at now, right? We're actually kind of figuring out, okay, if this is their way of going around the Constitution, if this is their way of making sure that they can violate what are the wins that we've already had, we just have to figure out our next move. And so with that, it's kind of also a huge honor to be able to pass it over to Gabriela from American Friends Service Committee and Sienna from CERC to talk about the long history of organizing in Colorado, but also what communities are doing with the information that's in this report now. So over to you, Gabriela and Sienna.
Great. We want to share with you a little bit of the history of Colorado around organizing and the hard work we've done to try to create a bright line between local law enforcement and ICE, and to keep ICE as much as we can out of our communities. So I want to give a little bit of a historical context because I think it really highlights how exactly what Jacinta was talking about, how when we make inroads, ICE figures out other ways to access information. And so we have to continue to fight back to stop these new ways so that we can achieve what we know communities deserve, to not have people detained, deported, and dehumanized by our overly, extremely bloated budget for the ICE and Border Patrol. So in 2016, like many places across the country, folks were in the street, immigrant rights folks were in the street speaking out against a federal bill, the Sensenbrenner bill, that would have criminalized immigrants and folks who were associating with immigrants at levels we had never seen before. So we had, while we were in the streets, as that was happening, a Democratic majority in the House with a Democratic governor passed SB 90, which was Colorado and one of the country's first show me your papers laws. And then we saw, as in Colorado, as we did across the countries, that communities were under attack. We had in Colorado, like other places, incredibly intense, horrific workplace raids and also home raids. And we saw deportations that reached their peak in 2009 with 9,040 detainers issued in Colorado. While all this was happening, we were organizing, and immigrants were joining each other across the state, but there was not the political will, or really, to be honest, the political power between 2006 and 2012 to repeal Colorado's Show Me Your Papers laws. So what we did is we started bringing the organizing that had been going on, culminated in 2012 by folks across the state coming together in what we called a Melt the Ice operation, where we came together and talked about it wasn't based on how are we going to get rid of just SB 90, Colorado Show Me Your Paper laws, but what are the values that we hold, that the community holds, that they want to see move forward in policies, and that will allow us to push back in the many different ways that ICE tries to attack our communities. And so that summit was a really critical time where values-based campaigns developed and allowed us to push different pieces of legislations in the coming years. And so then we proceeded to have a series of victories on state legislation in Colorado that ranged from driver's license that was part of undocumented immigrants leading that fight, that was different pieces of the puzzle, access to driver's license, to then in having in 2013, the repealing of Colorado's Show Me Your Papers law. And again, this came about after years of organizing, and then the Melt the Ice and the work that had been going on with the Unite Colorado campaign, which had representation of directly impacted folks from across the state, and really pushing the legislature to not create carve-outs, but fully overturn the SB 90 law. Then we saw through many years of organizing, we had the Denver City Council unanimously pass a sanctuary city ordinance called the Public Safety Enforcement Priorities. And while it was voted on unanimously, it was many years in the making, and there was a lot of pushback, and it was due to the incredible organizing that had been going on. And a lot of what the bill did was actually the city ordinance did was codify practices that were already in place and make them so they would stay in place and not be eroded of separating police and ICE from communities, and not having local law enforcement honoring detainers and not sharing information with ICE, although we were not able to stop some of the notifications that were happening. That was a huge piece. And then that led to, in 22 years later, what we were able to get passed, and immigrant leadership was able to get passed in a city level, to get passed in a state bill in 2019, where we had Colorado's sanctuary state policy was placed into law. And we honoring detainers became fully illegal in Colorado, and was a really important piece. And so it was, again, these laws didn't pass because of 1 year's work. They were because of the incredible organizing that had gone on across the state for many years. And then I wanna also just highlight that because these were very deliberate, distinct separation lines that were created between the local law enforcement and ICE. And this is why what we're seeing happening with the data brokers as extremely egregious, because it is against the spirit of the state sanctuary and city and county policies, and it is against what we've been working for. And so that's why we're continuing to organize. And I'll pass it over to Sienna to talk a little bit about the work that's currently going on that we hope you all will join in if you're not already a part of.
Thanks, Gabriela, and thanks to everyone for being on today. My name is Sienna. I'm with the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, and I have been super excited to be collaborating with Mi Gente and all of our other partners on this report. Yeah, like Gabriela said, and like everyone has said, I mean, we're pissed. This is pretty egregious, and it does feel really enraging to see data brokers providing the loopholes for ICE to get around the policies that we've passed. As we're uncovering, right, ICE is using these data brokers to continue getting information directly from jails, to getting direct information about release times and stuff like that. But they're also integrating predictive policing functions into products that are being marketed to law enforcement and to ICE. And that's really concerning to us here in the state. And of course, there are ramifications across the country just because of the ways that we know those tools like geolocating and hotspotting actually accelerate racial bias in our communities and in policing, and disproportionately harm Black and Brown communities. And so that's another piece that we're super concerned about. And also it means that there's a lot of organizing opportunities on a lot of different levels. And so I'm going to talk about really briefly some of those. I mean, the first demand of ours is to cut ties with LexisNexis and Appriss. These are companies that are harming our communities. They're companies that cannot be trusted. And as Maslin and Ramona detailed, you know, there's a direct contract both in the city and county of Denver, but also in El Paso County, where Colorado Springs is located. And so yeah, we're working to tell the city and county of Denver and the Denver sheriff to stop working with LexisNexis and to cut their ties with LexisNexis, excuse me. Of course, that includes Vincent Line stepping off his position on this advisory board, which, as Gabriela said, completely violates the spirit of the ordinance as the person who is directly responsible for implementing the sanctuary, Denver sanctuary ordinance in the jail. Also, there are great opportunities for us to strengthen the existing policies and ordinances that we have, because the policies need strengthening, especially around the sale and the sharing of personal information, both from law enforcement to ICE, although there's obviously the question of sale of data through the DMV as well. So we would love to prohibit the release of personal information from local law enforcement to ICE, including the jail release time. And there's some other exciting policy recommendations that we're exploring, both on the local levels, obviously in Denver, but also around the state, as well as the state level. And I just wanted to say that what we have seen is that these companies it's not just in Denver, right? There are impacts in rural communities in our state where people are being picked up by ICE through what might be license plate readers, things like that. And so I think there's absolutely statewide ramifications. And even though we see this direct contract in the Denver Metro, the issue is really statewide. Finally, there's as was mentioned by the researchers, there's companies that we do not want in our state, right? LexisNexis, the parent company, is RELX. And then the researchers also mentioned some of these other companies like Geolytica, Thomson Reuters, Palantir, EchoSec. We do not want to see these companies here. And I wanted to plug this really amazing tool from the American Friends Service Committee where Gabriela works called Investigate. It's part of a divestment campaign. And here you can actually look up companies that you yourself, your retirement account, your university, your faith community, your union might be invested in, because we can have an impact by as consumer investors by removing our investments. And so just wanted to plug this, and Gabriela is going to share some links in this chat for people to look into it as part of a divestment strategy. And I wanted to mention specifically that in Colorado, our Public Employees Retirement Association is actually invested in RELX. And so that's something we're interested in looking into as well. And then I think just following the lead of Mi Gente and the No Tech for ICE campaign, like we want to publicly shame these companies. Like they are harming our communities and they are not welcome in our state. So these are some fun photos from some actions that we had against Palantir when Palantir moved to Colorado back in 2020. And so, yeah, we're going to keep up the pressure on Palantir, as well as obviously LexisNexis and these other corporations as we move forward. So that's just kind of like a brief overview of kind of the different levels of work that we're hoping to engage in coming out of this report, and want to invite the folks on the call from Colorado to reach out to us to get involved. There's going to be more opportunities and calls to action over the next month or so. And also really want to invite folks to work with us to investigate what might be happening in your region in the state. And then of course, the same for folks across the country who are joining us today. Great, I will throw it back to you, Jacinta.
Thank you so much, Sienna. Thank you so much, Gabriela, for all of that breakdown of both the long history of organizing, but also what all of the amazing next steps and how people can plug in. So also please join me in the chat and sharing love for all of the organizers on the ground that are able to change the politics, make sure that folks have a way of plugging in, make sure that we have a way of sustaining each other in this fight. And yeah, just doing the daily grind of the organizing work to make all of this happen. So thank y'all so much. I know there have been a couple of questions that folks have put in the question and answer box, but just wanted to again encourage folks that if you have any other specific questions to put them in there. And I guess I wanted to start with one question, and this is definitely something that either if Madeline or Ramona want to answer it, or Sienna or Gabriela. But the question here is like, is it legal for the government to share information with data brokers? Like legally, what's going on? And I think there's a lot of different ways of answering this, but I think a lot of people, when they hear that data brokers have access to not only our court records and release dates, but also our utility bills or where we're driving our car because of license plate readers, there's this moment of like, holy shit, are they breaking the law? What's going on here? So I don't know if anybody wanted to kind of help try to answer that question or give us a little bit of info or background on how to be thinking about that question.
I can jump in really quickly first and just say that and Jacinta, you have more details on this, but I know that, utility companies after a public pressure campaign, stopped sharing information with ICE because it was in violation of, of the Constitution. And in some ways, a lot of what these data brokers are doing is collecting information that the government itself is not allowed to connect, and then handing it to like ICE on a platter, right? And so obviously there is some public information in there that people could look up, but what the data brokers are also doing is putting all this information together to make it super easy for ICE to access, and basically handing them profiles on our community members. And so I think that there are pieces that like are illegal, and then there's other pieces that are just egregious in terms of the ways that they're enhancing surveillance of our communities. But anyone else, please feel free to jump in on that as well.
Yeah, I would agree with Sienna. I think the legality around it is somewhat ambiguous. In terms of sanctuary laws, specifically in Colorado, that the law is more focused around detainers from ICE, which are like the 48-hour holds that local law enforcement agencies notify ICE to come pick somebody up if they're undocumented. And so I do not believe that like the sanctuary laws actually cover this kind of information sharing, and so it would need to be more expansive.
Definitely. No, and I think that's why this is such a hard nut to crack, y'all, right? Like this is why we're also in this situation, and why ICE has spent millions and millions of dollars on these contracts with data brokers, because they feel like it's a great way, it's a great loophole for them, right? To be able to buy this information that they consider public. But I think that one of the things that was really important, for example, that Gabriela was bringing up, is it goes against our values. It goes against the spirit of a lot of these policies. And so that's also part of why this is a rallying cry for organizing, right? Because the laws as they exist right now might not be enough to figure out how to defend us from this. But through our organizing, through actually exposing what's happening, we can actually push the policies of our cities, of our states, and even federal policies to actually include this. So we need to be able to actually sound the alarm and say, this is a problem. It's not that, oh, okay, well, if the law says it's okay right now, sure, right? This is actually a place, a new frontier where we need to be pushing to make sure that we can close this loophole, right? It's actually really similar to some of the stuff that happened with driver's licenses, right? The first step was getting the driver's license. Then they were openly sharing the information. And then we had to go back in and say, actually, no, you can't do that, and actually close that loop. So it's a very similar thing with our data. And so we have a lot of tools in our toolbox to do that, that include not only passing policies, but also, Sienna was saying, shaming these companies and holding them accountable for the human rights abuses that ICE conducts in our communities, and making sure that people can see that connection. So I did just want to be really clear, because I think sometimes people think like this can't possibly be legal, but actually tech companies and data companies, they're not thinking about human rights first, right? They're thinking actually about their bottom line and making a buck. And after that, they're actually thinking about the consequences. So for us, this is the opportunity to show the problems and the real life impacts that have, to figure out some of the things that we kind of can do that. And I guess I'll just ask one of the other questions that was in the chat, which is, why are sheriff's offices doing this? What's in it for them, right? Why are they continuing to collaborate with not only data workers, but ICE? How is this benefiting them in the way that they work? So I don't know if folks wanted to talk just a little bit about like the politics of why sheriffs would actually want to be partnering with this, or also how these companies are marketing their products, right? Like what are they saying that they could do, or what's their excuse from doing this?
I'll speak a little bit from we've been actually meeting with the Denver Sheriff's Office for over a decade, and that was what kind of led to the city ordinance and to then implementation of the policies. And we don't always agree. And one of the areas that we didn't agree on was we actually didn't want them to be sharing release information with law with ICE. And one of the arguments that they give is, well, they need to be collaborating with all agencies and that this is essential. And we've been very clear that you can collaborate in certain ways, but have be very clear cutoff of information that doesn't result in the immigration dragnet. So part of their justification is it's the way that they can do law enforcement. But I think it's important to highlight one of the pieces that came out of this report, which is that the part of what the tools that they provide are quote unquote predictive policing, which is basically using racist data to then say that crime is going to happen in certain areas. And I think a lot of that breaks down around racial and class lines and things. And so this kind of collaboration that is a justification for it is often based on racist practices and policies that we know our whole criminal justice and policing system is based on.
And that's super, super important to kind of remember that there's how these companies market themselves and what they say they're doing and what they're actually doing in communities, right? And again, like it is up to us through our organizing, through lifting up our voices, through fighting back, that we can push against those narratives and make sure that we unveil what actually is happening, right? In terms of how this all happens. And yeah, shout out to all of the folks that are talking about banning some of these technologies, right? That's what we have to be doing, right? We have to be organizing to say there is no space for that here. This is part of the way that we're holding, that we're pushing back against policing, that we're actually thinking about what keeps our community safe. And it's not investing in technologies, right? So many times we have heard from sheriffs, from police officers, from city council people, that technology, that data makes policing fairer, that it makes it more race neutral. They use all of these key terms, but I think it's the reality of our community's experience that we know that actually it's just giving police officers more toys, more gadgets, more power to use against our communities, as opposed to actually investing in things that are bringing community safety. So yeah, shout out to all of the folks who have been fighting against those and keeping the standards high, saying we got to ban those practices. We got to ban that, how that works. That's really inspiring and really exciting. And I think, where we're trying to get with all of this information from data brokers. So go ahead, Gabriela, did you want to say something else?
Yeah, I just want to add a piece that we haven't named here in fighting back on this. We obviously need to be looking at policies and practice of law enforcement, but we also, and I name this right now because we know that the FY23 budget is being discussed and voted on in Congress. And part of the reason why ICE can do this and invest billions and billions of our and immigrant taxpayer dollars in this is because they have such inflated budgets that are extreme levels that both parties in Congress have been voting to support. And so that's why AFSC and CERC are part of the Defund Hate campaign, which is working really hard to cut funding to ICE and CBP to cut the deportation machine at its knees, because we need to be having this fight at multiple levels. We need to do things like what was just shared with what's going on in Washington State with no invasive police tech, those kinds of policies. We need to beef up the state bills and city policies we have that include this kind of data in it. But we also need to be working at the federal level and also the local levels to be cutting budgets of the military, police, immigration dragnet state that is now created, where corporations are profiting incredibly from this and are engaging in extreme amounts of lobbying to get the dollars that they need. And that's what's driving this, along with the racist policies.
Definitely. I think going after the funding, whether it's at a federal level against CBP and ICE, or at a local level, whether it's around your police department, those are concrete tools that we have, right, to be able to organize, to be able to attack some of what's happening. So as y'all can see, we are trying our best. We are organizing. We are working together to both do the research to uncover how information is being shared, but then also give folks concrete ways that they can plug in and fight back. And so we know that there's going to be a lot of next steps going on in Colorado, right, in terms of the report, fighting against the sheriff, doing the state work, doing divestment work, all sorts of different ways to kind of get plugged in. But we also just wanted to take the last few minutes to also put out the invitation of, if you want to try to figure out what's happening in your city, if you want to figure out what's happening in your state, there's also a lot of ways that we would be happy to support as Mi Gente to try to figure this out. This is not just happening in Colorado. A couple of weeks ago in Cook County in Illinois, right, the county that includes the city of Chicago, we actually had a commissioner, Almanaya, introduce and pass a resolution to have a hearing, right, to try to explore how LexisNexis and other data brokers are also violating sanctuary policies there. We know that there are folks in New York City that are also exploring how all of this is happening. So if you're like, I noticed some fishy stuff going on in my neck of the woods too, someone came and picked up my cousin and I don't know how they got the info, let us know. We're happy to also figure out how to offer assistance, right? Like whether it's in the research, whether it's in the organizing, whether it's exploring policy together, whether it's going after these companies. I also noticed that there's a couple of folks in the chat that are law students or are lawyers that are practicing that want to figure out how to do that. We got librarians organizing against this. We got students figuring this all out. So one, just want to kind of give a shout out and encourage people to go check out the No Tech for ICE campaign, notechforice.com, our campaign website, where you can see a bunch of toolkits about how you can organize. You can read about the Colorado report, but also read about other studies that have happened in other places. You can sign petitions, you can get plugged in there as well. Or some of our organizers, including myself and Cynthia, will put our email addresses in the chat. So just feel free to reach out directly. This is really about building community, being in conversation with each other, because that is the way that we're able to kind of learn from all of the fights that are happening in different parts of the country. So I think we just want to kind of say that. We know that the fight is long. We know that right now, the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Secretary Mayorkas, is trying to pretend that there's a new day with ICE. We know that's not true. We know it's the same ICE agents conducting themselves in the same way, violating people's rights whenever they're allowed to. And so that we have to continue to fight back against detentions and deportations. And so that this is one of the ways that we can do that and one of the ways that we can continue to plug in. So just want to encourage folks to, reach out, get in touch. Again, thank y'all so much to all of the amazing presenters, not only for your work on the webinar tonight, but for your work for months and months leading up to this, if not for years and years in your state doing this amazing organizing. We really, really appreciate it. Really happy to be here and be in the struggle with all of y'all. And we'll wrap it up there. So thanks everybody so much. Have a great evening and la lucha sigue. So thank you.